Right. Let's grab our Bibles and go to Luke chapter 12. Wrong thing. Luke chapter 12. And we're going to be starting around verse 13. Luke 12 and verse 13. I'm going to read that down through 21, and then we'll come back and kind of talk about it a little bit. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, and be on your guard against all covetousness. For one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I shall store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is for the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.'" So we had a couple of lessons, obviously, Sunday and whatnot, where we discussed a little bit about laying up treasures in heaven. And we even brought this particular one out about 2 Sundays ago, this particular parable that Jesus talks about. But what is it that Jesus is pointing to with this? There's one key thing that he's trying to drive a point home on.
Basically, not to be greedy, trying to lay up treasures in heaven. In other words, do good.
Yeah.
For others, not be trying to accumulate for self, make your eyes all self, get yourself out of your box.
Yeah, absolutely. On other people, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes. Right. He lays out, in my mind, 2 primary points that he's trying to get across with this, and he tells you what they are even before he says the story, which is kind of nice, right? He says, "Be on guard against all covetousness," there in verse 15, "for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Right? So he's saying, this is basically what I'm talking about, and now I'm going to tell you a story to reinforce that, right? And obviously, covetousness or greed, wanting what somebody else has or wanting more for the sake of having more, right? And just that's what's the driving force. And I love that line, that life does not consist in the abundance of one's possessions, right? Because that's so much of what we're taught in our society is, to accumulate more and to have more. And, in this picture here, he really drives home, in a sense, about the idea of the guy who's reaches a point of being independently wealthy, right? And that's what he's been working toward. And he finally reaches that point where, man, I'm independently wealthy. I can sit back, relax, eat, drink, and be merry. And then he's dead. So all of that he did, chasing after those things, did him no good, right? And then he again drives home that point of laying up treasures for yourself, not laying up treasures for yourself, but laying them up, being rich toward God. Look at his statement as the landowner, the rich man, as he talks to himself or talks about this situation. What's something that stands out there? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And isn't that interesting? I hadn't thought about this point till you just brought that up, but it's interesting that he's, says to my soul, "Oh, you don't have to do anything." So he's trying to find a spiritual answer in physical goods, right? So he's telling his soul, "Oh, you got it made now, right? You're good to go," because he has all this. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. And we read that over in 1 Timothy chapter 6, 5. Yeah, 5 or 6, somewhere in there, right, where he says, you don't bring anything into this world, and you don't take anything out, right? And so what you accumulate here doesn't really matter for a hill of beans when you're gone. But when you go through there, if you count them up, there are 15 different I statements in his whole little diatribe there where he's talking about. So he's very focused on himself, right? Very focused on what makes him happy, what makes him feel secure, all of those things. That's what he's focused on, right? And he's being rich, laying treasures up for himself, as opposed to being rich toward God. The key things, right? Right. Well, then, God gives us the resources for what purpose? Mm-hmm.
We're just stewards of whatever it is.
Yeah. So, when he gives us something, then it's not for us just to say, oh, well, now I can just sit back and relax and enjoy this. It is to be used in his kingdom, right? It's a resource for us as his children, as his citizens of his country in this world, to use those things in his kingdom. If it's money, then use your money. You go back and read Romans chapter 12, and he talks about the different things that we have. And he says, if your gift is administration, then do it well. If it's in giving, then give generously. If it's in teaching, then teach. If it's in leadership, then lead. If it's in encouragement, you do so with zeal. He goes down that whole list of all the different things. Those are all resources. A part of those resources, if you're giving, then that means you got something to give, right? And so if you have the resources to give, then we should be giving them, right? We should be generous in giving those things. And again, it's kind of like what's his name? I can't think of his name now, but he's the guy, Dave Ramsey. There we go. He said it's easy to give away somebody else's money, right? And that his point is that it's not our money, so it's easy to give those resources away because it's not ours. It's his. It's God's. And if he wants you to have it, he'll give it to you. If he don't, then he won't.
Do you think people sin if they've done well and they have a nicer home, or they have more than however many vehicles, or do you think they're not seeing that paradox to give more, or to
Right.
just brainstorming?
No, I got you. And I think it all depends on the framework behind it, right? Because God gives us those resources for a purpose, right? So then what are we doing with the resources? Are we doing it with the resource for me, for myself, for my security, for what makes me happy? Because that's where I find my security and salvation is in my stuff. Or am I using the resources that God's given me, one, recognizing where it comes from, and then two, looking for ways to use it in his kingdom. Looking for ways to be able to take the resources that he's given us and give those out to others. And so I think that's kind of the idea. Now, I will say that I think there are times, like if you look at some of the mega church preachers and some of the ones that are the big names on TV and stuff like that, when they have multi-million-dollar mansions, it's kind of question that a little bit. You know what I mean? Because I understand having a nice house, but when you're at that point, at that level, it's like that might be just a little bit excessive. You think about how many people could be helped, with that. But then the idea comes down again. Romans was it 14, where he talked. I think it's 13 or 14, where he says, don't look at the master's servant who's doing something and cast judgment on them. You take care of what's in front of you. It's not up to us to police one another and say, well, you're doing that wrong, and you're doing that wrong, and you need to do it. That's not our part. Let them serve their Creator the way that's between them and God, and you serve Him the way it's between you and Him. Don't worry about the other servants. But I think there's potential there. You got to be careful with.
Two people that have the same house, the same cars, and everything. One person focused on God.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a nice house for me and my family.
Yeah.
A nice car for my wife and family.
Mm-hmm.
But he's still focused on God.
Mm-hmm.
The other person's total focus could be on having that house, having that car.
Yeah.
And then that could be wrong.
Yeah.
But, it goes back to the heart.
Yeah.
The heart is
100%.
the meat of all of it.
Right.
Because, heard a guy say one time, he had bought a diamond ring for his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody had said something to him about how he you know.
Yeah.
So he bought that for his wife.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right.
He said, now if I didn't have the money to do that,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Right.
he said, I give and I give generously.
Yeah.
And God's blessed me so that I can do this. That doesn't mean I got to give everything
Yeah.
and deny her everything.
Right. Because there's a balance, right? And a large part, like what you mentioned earlier, comes from your heart. Because you can be a greedy, selfish individual that lives in a box under the bridge and have nothing. And you can be an extremely generous, God-centered individual who lives in a multi-million-dollar house. So for us to look at the individual and then make that judgment call, we got to be careful about it, right? Because we can't see the heart.
Money necessarily, it's just I want the money so I have power and influence, or I
Yeah.
want the money because I want security and I don't
Right.
have to go through anything that if
Right.
I live comfortable,
Right.
then you know, or some of people are just addicted to making money.
Yeah.
They don't really, the money's just whatever. It's
Right.
the making that next dollar, that
Yes.
deal, or I got that from somebody.
Right.
Or,
I got another zero in the bank account. That makes me happier, right? I got another.
That's kind of like what it's saying here. You know,
Yeah.
I need another barn. Well, he wasn't worried about having security as much as he just wanted more.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the kicker, because it's not about the possession or owning of, which sometimes can kind of get us, right? Because so like we're just real close to finishing our house, and sometimes, you know, when I look at that, I feel guilty. I'm like, am I spending more money on this than what I should be spending? You know, and so you kind of have this almost like, you know, self-reflection point, which is good. All of us need to have a self-reflection point with what we do with God's resources. You know what I'm saying? And so it's important for us to do that, but also not to go to the point where we're so anxious, worried, and scared about misusing the resources that God gives us that we go and bury it in a hole. Because we were told not to do that either. But, you know, to use those resources to move forward, to develop, and to, you know, establish His kingdom. And that's the kicker. Where's your heart in how you're using what you have and what you've been given? It's just real easy for us to look at somebody and then make a decision, right? But we don't know the heart. You know, it's only Jesus that knows the heart. You know, you take a look at Zacchaeus and you take a look at the rich young ruler. You know, those two individuals. Zacchaeus has a history of being a tax collector, and nobody likes him, right? Because he's been an extortioner, tax collector, and working for the Romans. And you have the rich young ruler who's just a savvy businessman, if you will, right? So he's got a lot of money, probably very well known and very well liked, because he says he keeps all of the commandments, you know, for life and all those kind of things. So he has all those pieces together. But when you look at the two, Jesus says to the one, well, give away all that you've got and come follow me. And he goes away sad because he can't turn loose. And Zacchaeus, he never even had to tell him. He said, you know, anybody I've defrauded, I can pay them back fourfold. You know, I give back this, I'll give, right? Because he had that heart change when he had that interaction with Jesus. And that's a key thing. When we have that interaction with Jesus, there should be a heart change, right? There should be that change where we're not looking at me and my heart now, but we're looking out. We're looking to Him. And then think about this. We just got done talking about not being fearful, right? Earlier up there in verse 7, it says, you know, fear not, for you're more valuable than the sparrows. He talks about don't be fearful there, but acknowledge Jesus. And then he talks about greed here. And the very next thing we get into is, again, he's talking about being anxious and anxiety and being fearful again. Because in my mind, greed and fear and anxiety, they all three run very closely together. Because when you're greedy and you're going after more and more, then that's where you kind of center around. So if you're always fearful of that being taken away. You're always fearful of that being stolen or whatever. So there's that underlying fear and anxiety about money, because there's always a potentiality of it being taken away. Right? If you got a bunch of money in the stock market, you know, one day you're making millions, the next day you got zero. You know, and then you've all heard a lot of folks who've committed suicide over that. You know, back when the Depression happened, a lot of people were jumping off buildings and killing themselves. Whenever everything happened with, was it 2008, 9, when the real estate bubble burst and all that, and there were a lot of people that committed suicide after that, because that's what their security was around. And then whenever that went away, then their anxiety and fear and everything else went through the roof. Right? And so greed and want And anxiety and fear can they create a monster, right, that just kind of eats away at you. And so you have to be very, very careful about it because they all tie together very well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read verses 22 through 34. 22 through 34. And he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap, they have neither storehouses nor barn, yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you're not able to do a small thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat or what you are to drink, nor be worried. For all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom and desire, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give to the needy, provide yourselves money bags that do not grow old, and treasure in heaven that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." So again, he's piggybacking on the same idea of covetousness and greed, and where your heart is, there your treasure is. Where laying up, the right kind of eternal possession, right? Not worrying about the material things that are going to be here and gone again. Something I hadn't caught before I was just now reading this is he tells us up here in verse 14, life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And then down here in verse 23, life is more than food and the body more than clothing. So that's a very consistent theme, again, coming through, pointing out that it's not about the material. It's not about your food. It's not about your clothing. It's not about your home. It's not about your money. It's not about those things. That's not what life is about. So don't let that get you wrapped up in some kind of anxiety-riddled world of where that is your focus. But rather, where are we supposed to put our focus? On him, right? What are we supposed to be seeking? Right? We're seeking his what? His kingdom. Right? We're seeking, and the idea there is not like, well, I can't find it because we're a part of it. Right? But it's the idea of seeking to expand the kingdom. It's seeking to expand his influence on this world. Right? And then he knows that we need these things, right? He knows we need food, clothing, houses, all. He knows those things, and he's going to provide. Right? And he may provide in a profound way. Like it to me, when I think about our house that we're building, that is like a over an abundance. I think about the idea of pressed down, shaken together, and overflowing into your lap is the gift of God, right? And to me, that's the way it feels. Is that this is a gift from him that's pressed down, shaken together, and overflowing. So much more than what I could ever even think or imagine to have, right? And that's what he's giving to Christy. I got to think about, okay, well, how am I to use this resource in his kingdom? Because I'm seeking his kingdom first. He is providing me with these things as I'm seeking his kingdom. And so then I use those resources more and more in his kingdom to try to serve and continue to push forward. And that's the one of the key points. And it's just like what he talked about with the talents. I hadn't thought about talking about the talents, but when he says, the ones that are faithful with little will be given more, right? And will be given more. Will be given more. And so as we're seeking, as we're walking down that path, he's going to be giving us more resources. That doesn't mean more money. It doesn't mean more land. It may mean that, but he's giving us more resources, right? More ability, whether that's in a talent, whether that's in a skill set, whether that's in whatever the situation is. There are a lot of different opportunities. Right now, time is a resource that's very limited for me. But for y'all who recently retired, time is a significant resource that you have. You got a whole lot of time. Whereas for me, my time's like here. And so, but it's a resource regardless. In how we use it, are we using it wisely or not? That kind of thing. And it's different because right now, my bodily needs are different than your bodily needs. I can go to bed at 10 o'clock, get up at 3, run 10 miles, go to work, do my thing, come here and do all that and continue to be okay. That's not going to happen in 20, 30 years from now. I'm, yeah, right? But not no more. But it's, it's your body's abilities change, right? And so everything is in that constant flux. And so the point is, don't worry about it because it's outside of your control anyhow. Let God take care of that, and you focus on using those resources and things to take care of what He needs you to be focused on. I love this verse down in verse 32. He says, "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." Right? So, like, again, that whole idea of seeking the kingdom, it's not like, well, man, I hope I can find it. No, it's His pleasure. He wants to give us the kingdom. He wants us to be a part. He wants us to be in His family, in His church, in His body, in His flock, in His kingdom. He wants that for us. And it's His good, makes Him feel good. It's His good pleasure to give that to us. Right? And so as we are seeking that, He is giving that, and then He's providing everything else. I always say that the idea for us is to be the willing hands, to be the ones that are willing to be there, willing to work, willing to put forth, and let Him take care of the resources and the time and the purpose and the direction and the effects, right? And for us not to get worried about it. Like the Vacation Bible School. We may have a Vacation Bible School and 2 kids show up, and we look at it and think, man, that's terrible. That just was not a success. But we have no idea what those 2 kids are going to grow up and do or be. The mom used to tell me a story a long time ago about a young lady that went to a Bible school or a vacation Bible school, and that was like the only thing that she ever had gone to. And later on in life, she had boys, 1 or 2 or 3, had several sons, and all of them became gospel preachers because of that one interaction that she'd had. The people who did that Vacation Bible School had no clue that, 25, 30 years from now, she's going to be having children who are 20 years from that, we're going to be gospel preachers based off of that one interaction where the seed was planted. We're not privy to that, but God is. But again, we're to be willing hands. And whether, like when we were in Alaska, we had a Vacation Bible School, and one of the ladies, we were having a discussion after action kind of thing about it, and she said, as far as outreach, it's the way she described it. And I was like, well, I understand where you're coming from because it wasn't as, we didn't get a whole lot of new people coming in, but you don't have any idea what kind of effect that's going to have on people, down the road. The things that we see as success and what we determine as success isn't what God sees as success. And so we let Him handle that department. And we try not to get worried about it because I guarantee you, if only 2 kids show up, I'm going to be worried about it. I'll be like, what's going on? Right? But it doesn't matter. We're still going to give them everything that we've got. Whether it's 2 kids or 200 kids. I think it might be worse if we had 200 kids that showed up. That might be really bad. But but again, not worrying and not getting wrapped around the axle about those things, but letting God take care of that. Let Him be the one that drives and directs and takes care of those things. All right, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think that's our last point we can kind of get to tonight. Well, I'll say that that's going to be the class for tonight. Next week, we're going to pick up with verse 35. And I like this next section because I've known some people out of this next section that read this and take it literally, where they literally go to sleep at night and they're fully clothed. They literally have one person in their family that stays up all night on a rotation that keeps a lamp lit. And so as you read this, is that what he's trying to tell us to do? Or is he talking about something else? So that's something to think about and read about for next time around.